Oh, right. I hope my neighbor doesn't start
Yeah.
vacuuming.
I know, right? All right, welcome back to the Shine Within podcast. I have here the lovely TeZa Lord. TeZa Lord's journey, she uncovers the divine in everyday moments, a devoted explorer of consciousness in its myriad forms. TeZa's life and work serve as a canvas, painting tales of her adventurous youth and strokes of mysticism and transformative words. As an artist turned writer and an impassioned spiritual speaker, she champions a life filled with balance, fulfillment, and a holistic perspective. Celebrating 4 decades free from alcohol and drugs, TeZa is also a dedicated yogi and meditator, always eager to share the blissful disciplines of yoga with curious souls. So, I want to just welcome you today. Thank you so
Oh,
much for being on my podcast.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's great.
Absolutely. And I know we just talked earlier and I was like, oh, I just already love our conversation. Let's go ahead and hit record. But if you can,
Right.
I know that was really good, but hopefully we can bring that back again. And I'm sure we will. But can you just share with us the turning point that led you towards sobriety?
Oh my God. Well, near death, right? I
Oh,
mean,
hey.
what person who's enmeshed in addiction is just going to stop? No, they don't stop. They don't wake up one morning and say, "Oh, today's the day. I think I'll stop." Well, of course, we go through all those days. We promise ourselves, and then we forget by the second cup of coffee. We do. And well, my previous life, I have a previous sobriety life and a post sobriety life. My previous sobriety life, I call myself a she pirate. I just really wanted to create trouble. I was addicted to thrills. I mean, that's one of the biggest addictions that all humans have. Thrills, whether they use drugs or alcohol, they might jump out of airplanes or they might have dangerous relationships. But mine led me to the Caribbean, and it was the early 70s. And I wanted to just sail, and I wanted to have adventures, and I wanted to be a part of that third world energy. And I stayed there for the whole decade of the 70s, got myself in a lot of really interesting situations, one of which was doing inter-island trading with fruits and vegetables. I know all about tropical shipping and inter-island trade. And I had a restaurant in St. Thomas, Virgin Islands. And then eventually, what happened to me to get sober was everything came crashing down, and I found myself in a third world prison. And I wasn't really guilty of anything at that particular point. But yet, I had been monkeying around with a bunch of, not very legal stuff. I won't mention it all because those are all things that I write about in my books. And you have to get the books to find out the true story.
Yeah.
And there I was in prison on the border of Haiti and the Dominican Republic in a really awful town called Barahona. And I went nuts. I said, "What am I doing here?" I was completely alone, away from any family. There were some friends in the other cell, but they were just as desperate as I was. And basically, I saw all the wrongs that I had done on my life written up on the walls in invisible ink when I was in this terrible, godforsaken hell pit in the Dominican Republic. And I stayed there because they wouldn't let me out for 3 months. And 3 months in a third world jail is equivalent to about 30 years, as far as I'm concerned, in traditional, what we consider civilized countries. I mean, there was no food. They served rice with ketchup. So basically, to even live, you had to have a little bit of cash to throw out the window and beg somebody to cook you a meal. They had no mattress. I had to buy a mattress. They had no toilet. They had a hole in the floor.
Mm.
And it was hell. And so I survived that. But, as soon as I got out of there, I couldn't wait to get drunk. And that really showed me how low I was, how very low I was. So you'd think that somebody like that would just get out of jail and say, "Wow, that was an opportunity. Let's start over. Let's do a reset." But no, And so I was so sick by that point because I really picked up a lot of bad infections with that hole in the floor that they called a toilet. And by the time I got back to the States, I was very sick. And still, I didn't stop drinking. And I was in a very dark place. And some dear friends of mine recorded me in one of my dark places because I was a blackout drinker. And you're an alcoholic if you are a blackout drinker. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. A lot of other people who don't go through blackouts, they might, say, oh, I'm just a social drinker or whatever. But if you get into having blackouts, believe me, you are an alcoholic. So in a blackout, my friends recorded me and they invited me for lunch, a couple of days later and played the recording. And I just didn't believe them. I was totally in denial. I said, this is a bad joke. Whoever that person is, I wish them luck, but they're really in a bad way. And my two friends kept saying, TeZa, this is you. And I kept saying, no, it's not. And they kept playing it, the dear hearts. Thank God they kept playing it. Until finally, what happened was those veils that they say cover our consciousness, they parted. And I heard my voice. And I just died. I just died of not so much embarrassment, but I realized how low my life had gone. And it took me 3 days to really stop crying and stop shaking and stop being totally freaked out. And I dragged myself to a meeting. I did get sober through AA. So for me, I tried everything in years previously and nothing worked for me. So I finally dragged myself and I begged for help. And I was given the help I needed. And from then on, my life was just one series of incredible coincidences or synchronicities, really, not coincidences, but just being in the right place, the right time, finding the right friends, the right teacher. And I became a meditator and really heavily into the yogic world. I had been, ever since a teenager, a yoga person, but never really understanding what it was about. So that was the beginning of my spiritual life in 1984.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, I think I was 3 in 1984. I was
My
3
gosh,
years old.
yeah.
There's a little baby there. But that is
Right.
amazing. I actually experienced not prison, but just like a couple of days of jail. And I mean, just comparing from what you experienced to what I experienced is like a luxury. It's like the Four Seasons practically then. Oh my goodness. So
Right.
I couldn't
Yeah.
imagine that. But then having your friends then go ahead and record, and that was like kind of like the wake up call, like, okay, this is not me. Who is this person here? My best friend back in, this was 2003 or so, she was an alcoholic and I was drinking with her, but very little. I was mostly using ecstasy and going to parties and things like that. But she was a blackout drinker and she wouldn't remember anything ever. And I felt like sometimes she would even, like, it wasn't even her. I felt like someone had possessed her because she was like a monster. And
Hmm.
I remember it was terrifying, but unfortunately she got well, fortunately she got help, but unfortunately it didn't work because she wound up getting into a car crash and she unfortunately then passed away. And so that should have been like my wake up call, like, okay, Gina, you shouldn't even be drinking at all here. Your best friend just passed away. But I was continuing drinking and it was very hard for me to quit. And I went to AA and I went to the try to do the 12 steps. Didn't work out for me too much. It wasn't until I got like a mindset coach that helped me and started to learn more about like spirituality. And she's also a yoga teacher, so I definitely appreciate yoga. It helps the back
Oh
tremendously.
yes.
It helps
Oh
the
yes.
mind.
Anybody who has scoliosis, get into yoga. That's how I got into it when I was a teenager. So because I have a
Yes.
bad back. But you said the key word. The if the spirit is not involved, a sobriety work won't take effect because that's the whole basis of sobriety. And how do I know this? Well, if anybody knows the history of AA, it goes back to the work before AA, which was started by Jung, Carl Jung, who basically was consulted by these two guys who really wanted to get sober back in, whenever it was the early 40s, who
Mhm.
started AA. And Jung who was, basically he was a break off from Freud. It was early days of psychology. He said there must be a spiritual awakening. There must be. And so these two guys back in the States said, well, how do we do that? And that's how they came up with the 12 steps. So the 12 steps is about a spiritual awakening. And a lot of people, unfortunately, who are in AA don't have good guidance and they don't get to that spiritual awakening. But I was blessed because my original helper, sponsor, whatever you call it, she was an angel. So she totally guided me. And I think that a lot of people who don't really connect with the magic of the 12 steps haven't had good guidance.
Mm.
It really could be something like that. Because you can have good and bad of everything. There's even, good presidents, bad presidents, right?
Yeah.
good basketball players and bad basketball players. And the same with spiritual guides. There are some people who are totally in their ego and all they want to do is control you. Well, those are unfortunate. They're not really very spiritualized people. They're just control freaks who have found a medium. But, when you mentioned ecstasy, when I got sober, ecstasy had just been invented. And I was really into any kind of psychedelic, also, all the plant medicines, because my history has a lot to do with ayahuasca, coca, and all the plant medicines, mushrooms. And I was a botanical illustrator. So I was working for scientists who were studying the plant medicines through Harvard University. So I had this privilege of working with people who had the scientific point of view that it was an honor to work with the sacred that the indigenous world was giving the civilized world, the so-called civilized world. And that's, it was just such a wonderful way to be introduced to the plant medicines. But along comes ecstasy, which of course is MDA plus, I think, acid or something. It's a combination, it's MDMA. And I was familiar with MDA, but the MDMA was a whole different ballgame. So I saw everybody taking ecstasy. And at that point, I was really so in love with sobriety that I just felt like it was, and I do today, to this very day, feel it's the highest high there is.
Mm.
There's nothing higher than the way we are in our natural state. And when I learned that, I said, oh my God, I've been wasting all this time with drugs and alcohol. This is the highest.
And you're so right. Yes, because I feel like a high every day. And
It's
people
true. It's
And people
true.
ask me, "Are you been drinking too?" I'm like, "No, this is how I am naturally." And
Yeah.
there's no, you're absolutely right. There's no other better feeling than just natural sobriety and
Well,
natural
true.
being.
Yeah. And true addicts, I mean, we have been to hell. And so when somebody says, oh, do you want to go to heaven? Or hey, we've already been to hell. So being alive is heaven. We know what hell is like.
Mhm.
Addiction is hell. To me, when I first got sober, I looked around and I saw how everybody is into addiction. And it's so common. It's the common denominator. And I just thought that it really was the devil. To be an addict, to be like a slave, a victim of your addiction was waltzing and dancing with the devil. So whenever I think of the choices that I have, because that's the big thing, to know that you have a choice, I think of like a devil sitting on one side of my shoulder and there's a little angel on the other side, and I'll say, well, which do you think I'm going to be activating if I do something, or if I hang out with a certain person, or if I entertain a certain thought, or don't do something. I mean, I'll talk to this angel and the devil and I'll say, do you think I'm going to be going closer to a drink or further away from a drink? With practically everything I do,
Mm.
I have to make that decision because it's a choice.
Yes, my mentor said the same thing. We all have a choice. It is up to us. And
Yes.
it is really up to us. And the stronger we get with practices of like meditation and doing yoga and just connecting with our spirit, the easier the choice is going to make, that it's going to be the right choice. Otherwise we get stuck
Yes.
in that rut. At least I've experienced that for myself.
Yes.
Yes.
Uh-huh. And because, of course, when somebody is so used to having what they call self-will run riot, where my choice is to get as screwed up as I can today and blast off from the planet. Well, that's not the right choice. But when we're in addiction, we sabotage ourselves. That's why we need guides. That's why
Mhm.
we need mentors. That's why we need steps. However,
Mhm.
you get help, it doesn't matter. I mean, I'm not a hardcore Bible thumping, what they call it, the big book thumpers. I'm a very eclectic yogi. I'm a very eclectic sober person. But for me, it's very important to have a guide
Mhm.
and to ask a sober person to help you is the best way to find the first step toward getting well. Because when you're in the throes of addiction, your will has become tainted. And you think you're just living your life, but you're not. You're just living out the will of this addiction.
Mhm.
And it wants to kill you. I mean, most people don't realize how addiction is so serious. It really wants you dead.
Mhm.
And it won't stop until you are dead.
Mhm.
When you're grappling with that kind of a terrible wrestle.
Yes, because I remember I've had I should have been dead 100 times, I feel like, because and then
Mm,
there were some
mm.
close calls as well. But somehow, some way, like that wasn't my time to go, and I have a mission. And
Right,
speaking about mission, let's talk about your mission of elevating consciousness and spreading
right.
positivity. How do you think your
Yes.
personal journey actually informed and shaped this mission?
Well, I think the whole entire human race is going through what we addicts have gone through who are sober, and we came to the realization that we were on the wrong track. I see all of humanity being addicted to thrills and materialism and more, whatever it is, whether it's control or sex or money, it's more. That's the material world. And so once you have turned your back on that and embraced sobriety, and I'm talking about emotional sobriety, not just not picking up a drink or a drug, because a lot of people do that and they're like freaked out. They're like, woo, they're the white knucklers. They're like holding on, like, some people fantasize about getting drunk. Like I've heard people 30 years after getting sober saying, man, I just think about it all the time. Like, hello,
Oh, wow.
where is your spirit? So that's not the kind of sobriety I'm talking about. That's just not drinking, but that's not really spiritual and emotional sobriety. But once you have embraced a spiritual life by doing what you have to do, which is to get rid of the demons, however your coach or your mentor or the group or whatever you're working with tells you, you have to get rid of this junk that's inside of you. It's like little demons that are ruling your life, and they're just not you. They're false demons. And in most cases, they're either your parents or your cultures or your churches or your temples or whatever culture you came up in, telling you you're a bad person, blah, blah, blah. Or sometimes you just come in to this reincarnation with these things attached to your soul. Whatever way, if you want to be happy, you have to eradicate them. So that's the very first thing. And my job as a spirit activist is to show people by sharing my story. And I do that in my first three books, my first nonfiction books, about the beautiful like energy that you get into when you have dedicated yourself to this higher choice than the lower choice, which is dancing with the demons
Mhm.
and waltzing with the devil, which I used to do. So I can recognize it. It just is to nowhere place. You'll end up dead
Mm.
eventually. So I could not have delivered my message if I had not had every single instance that happened to me. Like my first book, for instance, my first nonfiction book, it's called In the Eye. And the I, meaning not the eye that we see with, but the me, myself, and I. And I'm teaching girls who are in prison how to empower themselves And I always start off by saying, I'm just like you guys, except I didn't get caught and thrown into jail as early as you did. And their eyes pop out and they say, what? You know, this really nice looking lady who looks like my grandmother, but more agile than any of their grandmothers. She's telling me that she was just like me. And then, you know, any questions they have, I would answer, but I didn't. It's not about me when I'm teaching them how to be calm, even when they're in prison. So I could not have done that if I had not had my own prison experience, if I had not become an addict like they all are, or, you know, somebody who stole, or somebody who tried to, you know, commit armed robbery and all those things. Oh, I've done all those things too. I'm not proud of it, but that's the way that my life went. So I really think that in order to help a world that's gone crazy, because to me, our world is pretty crazy, and whenever we meet a sane person like you, Gina, you're that beautiful aura behind you of peace and serenity. I mean, it just feels like home, doesn't when we
Oh,
meet another sane person, because there's so many people out there whose energies are all jarred up and scared and paranoid about where we're going, not realizing that every single thing we choose makes a difference, especially with the environment, for instance. You know, instead of being freaked out that, oh, the world is coming to an end. No, like, like stop buying things,
mm,
recycle, take your compost to a little pile and grow some tomatoes. I mean, there's a lot of things we can do besides being
yeah.
freaked out.
Yes, the fear. I feel like a lot of the people here are just fearful, everything. And then that fear turns into anger or sometimes even sadness. And
Mm.
it's just that that vibration is just it lingers. And I know I can tell because first off, I don't like going to malls at all. That's not my thing.
Oh,
I do
I'm
not like
allergic to
it.
malls. No.
I, I do not like malls. I feel like gross inside. I don't like fluorescent lighting and my eyes turn red.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it just stores. I find myself, I appreciate more of the nature. And so anytime I feel like I'm in that type of environment where there's like lower vibration, lower frequency, I have to recharge out by
Yeah.
going. Luckily I live by mountains behind me, but then I also have the city right next to me here.
Uh-huh.
But I'm able to go out and hike and then just
That's great.
appreciate and breathe. And then that's how I recharge. I'll take off my socks and put my feet in the dirt though, and just that gives me a little bit extra boost
Yes.
in my I
Yes.
and that's what I was doing in my sobriety. I noticed I really was connecting to nature. Now you
Yes.
love nature as well.
I am a nature freak. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you were talking about the Grand Canyon before. I've never personally been there, but I've been to Kauai and Kauai, it's there's a place oh my goodness, I can't even think of its name right now, but it looks like the Grand Canyon, but a little bit more colorful.
Uh-huh.
And I
Uh-huh.
went there and I my husband took me there last year and we went and breathtaking. I almost passed out because I couldn't breathe. now,
Yeah,
now I knew
breathtaking.
where they got the term breathtaking because it
Right.
literally took my
Yeah.
breath away.
Uh-huh.
Beautiful. I was like, I felt like I was in a whole different planet. I'm like, what is this? And so I just appreciate nature. What are some of your favorite places besides Grand Canyon? So I can go ahead and take notes so I can go
Oh,
visit.
well, we this time last year, my husband and I were in Patagonia, and we spent 3 months in Bolivia and Uruguay and Chile, and I could go on and on about my favorite places, but after being in Patagonia, oh my goodness, it was just so amazing. There's so many places. I mean, really, you could say your own backyard.
Yeah.
If your mind is like focused on the nature part of it, like even if you just have a little patch with a few ants crawling around and you can feel the earth, it doesn't have to be a spectacular place, a mecca that everybody goes to. But of course, we do have our favorite places. And I must say that when I went to Machu Picchu, I felt like, oh, I have I have been here before. You know, we have connections. Our soul has connections. I have never been attracted to going to Africa for some reason. I have never been attracted to going to India, even though I'm a lifelong yogi. But I love the West Indies. And and I'm very attracted to any place out west, like even strange places that look like the barren deserts. Like last spring we went and I camped where the Apaches were held out. They were the last of the Native Americans who really resisted the colonial takeover by white men. And so Geronimo was the famous warrior of the Apaches, and nobody could catch this dude. And we were following in the footsteps of Geronimo in a really rough section of Arizona down by the Mexican border. And he literally hid in holes in the ground, kind of like rocky ground, so the cavalry couldn't get him. So my husband and I are like, we just love following spectacular people who have gone before us, like Lewis and Clark, who discovered the way to get to the West by going up the Mississippi and then discovering other rivers. And we've taken canoe trips with friends, not just by ourselves, following in the footsteps of Lewis and Carroll. And oh gosh, like even Israel, I lived in Israel for a year. And what's happening now over there with the conflict, I totally get it in a different way than anybody who's reading the news might not get it, because they haven't lived there and they haven't felt the millennial era of conflict going on between these two peoples that are really cousins, the Jews and the Arabs. I mean, it's going to take a while for them to heal it, and I pray that it will be healed. But I understand it because I lived in Israel, and I did a lot of camping in the Sinai, the desert that is now, it was given back to Egypt. So I have many places that are favorite of mine. But I must say, if somebody said, what is your favorite place in the whole world? I would say Dominica, which is smack dab in the middle of the West Indies. It's an independent island, but I lived there for 3 years, and it's just the wildest place. It has animals there, like huge parrots, the world's largest parrot, and the world's most luminescent boa constrictor that nowhere else on earth are they found, and many insects and different kinds of creatures in the forest. And it was a beautiful experience. And I was involved in the agricultural business there, helping people like who were basically peasant farmers to get themselves coordinated into co-ops and helping to sell their produce. So it was a really wonderful experience being there.
Oh, that's beautiful. And that's going to be easy for me to remember, Dominica, because my son's name, the oldest son's name is Dominic. So yeah,
Yeah.
I'll have to visit. Well, I have to go travel first and foremost. I haven't been traveling too many places lately. But I will. I think I have enough time here on Earth still to go to these different places that you mentioned and then just
Well,
appreciate nature.
I think the journey inward, the spiritual journey, is more important than the journey outward.
Oh, yeah.
Because, like during the pandemic, for instance, my husband and I had started podcasting. Our podcast is called TeZa Lord. And because we went on this 6-month trip before the pandemic, nobody knew the pandemic was coming. We just happened to be thirsty for a real adventure. So we went all over Canada, the southern part of Canada, went over to the Badlands of North Dakota, came down into Utah and Washington State, and ended up down at the Mexican border in Texas. So, and then when we got home, the pandemic began. So we were already used to like cooking for ourselves and being alone. So the pandemic was not so challenging for us. But the biggest thing I wanted to bring out about this was we had been adventuring on the outside every day or every other day. We were in a different spot. And that's all very well and good. But when the pandemic began and we were all in isolation, then I thought, wow, this is a great opportunity to focus our podcasts on the journey inward. And we started speaking specifically. Our conversations were about these things that we discover when we go inward, and how many people really take the trouble to have that inward journey. It takes time, it takes effort, and you have to say to yourself, I'm going to explore my inner life, which is my spiritual life. whether you do it through meditation or just taking a walk in the woods and being quiet, or just looking outside your window, if you have a tree and becoming immersed with something else that comes from nature besides your own self. So the inner journey, I think, really is so important. And that, if somebody asked me, if you had a choice to go, all over the world on a cruise, or to take some more time and go within and just really explore what adventures await for you there, I would choose the inner journey.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm so happy you brought that up. And then that's why my show is called Shine Within, because it is that inward journey. And that's where I had to discover, who am I, the love that I have, and just all these different things. But I noticed 2020 did give everyone that pause to start
Mm-hmm.
discovering what they like doing. It doesn't have to be like that 9 to 5 job. And, they rush, they're in traffic, they go to work, and then they're in traffic going back home. And then they're trying to rush and cook for dinner and cooking and then put the kids down and
Mm-hmm.
good. But
Mm-hmm.
there's not much of that. What about our gifts? What do we love doing? Like, I see your
Mm-hmm.
beautiful background there in the camera,
Yeah.
and it's beautiful. You created that.
Yes, that's one of my older paintings. I feel like I'm flying. A lot of my
Yeah.
work, I feel like it's flying. I had a lot of dreams. A lot of people dream about flying. I think that's our spirit within. If you talk to people about their dreams, there are some commonalities we all have, and I think flying is a very common one. And and so I paint it a lot too, because it feels like the spirit body. The
Mhm.
spirit body is not grounded. It's not harassed by schedules and expectations or even labels. And I always paint my figures nude, because I think that the skin is is beautiful, and no matter what shape our body is. And when we put clothes on it, it's almost like we're embarrassed about just letting our true nature shine through. So all my work is with nudity, and I love the human body. Of course, I don't just do humans. I also do plants, and I do images of, like right now, I'm working on a series of ancient indigenous people, the people who are extinct, actually.
Oh, that's what I mean, that's beautiful. I'm noticing also during my spiritual journey, I'm connecting with animals more. Like I've always loved furry animals, but I'm just taking like even bugs, for example, and I'm starting to
Yeah.
appreciate them. Like the spiders, I'm still kind of I don't know, I'm
Yeah.
still a little spooked
Right.
out.
Right.
I'm not there yet. But like
All right.
even bees,
Don't
they're
see arachnophobia, that
oh,
horrible
I know.
movie.
I saw that in the movie theater when I was young. Oh, with
Oh,
Not John
but
Candy. What was his name? John Goodman.
oh, okay. So
Yeah.
one of my books is about animals. One of my
Oh,
books is called Hybrid Vigor, which is a interesting biological term, where if you take the best of one species and take another of, not necessarily species but cousins, and put them together, you create a new and better species, which is a hybrid vigor.
oh yeah.
And so that book, which is number two after In the Eye, it's funny we're talking about these things in sequence. It's my own personal experiences. Like, talk about bugs. Like, to me, a moth is almost like a perfect allegory of what it's like to have a spiritual life. Because a moth, it just has to go to the light, even if it's going to kill itself, if it gets electrocuted or zapped. I hate those
Oh
bug
yeah.
catchers where they zap them. And but a moth will go commit kamikaze into a flame, sometimes like a candle. And a moth, it comes from just this inner desire to be with the light. And also the way that caterpillars shed and they metamorphosize into beautiful butterflies. And I felt like that when I got sober. It was like
Mm.
having a new life, being reborn. Didn't you feel like that, Gina?
Oh yeah, died to myself. Yeah, I was like, okay, well, that's why you say
Yeah,
past life. Yeah, that is my past life.
it's my past life, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so many things that animals can help us with. And I love the fact that they have these new dogs that are assistant dogs. Like, some of them are seizure alert dogs. They can actually tell when a person is before they're going to have a seizure, so the person can get some help before they actually go into a seizure. And of course, the seeing eye dogs. I know in one of the episodes in my book, Hybrid Vigor, my life was saved by a totally strange dog that just came to me when I was in the depths of a very bad trip. It was just in my head. It was probably drug induced, no doubt. And I was just in hell. And all of a sudden, I felt this wet nose on my hand. And I look up, and there's this dog I'd never seen before, just looking me right in the eyes, saying, "You're okay. This is just in your head." And that dog saved my life. And that dog stayed with me until I was out of the emergency that I was feeling, that I was being sucked into some horrible, I don't know, death. And then when I opened my eyes, the dog was gone. And nobody in the house where I was staying had ever heard or seen this dog before. It just came from an open door on a beach. It was the house was close to the beach, and that dog picked up on my vibrations that I needed help.
Wow. Animals are so incredible. Like I feel like I love cats too. I love dogs and cats. I love all animals.
Yeah.
And this cat comes to our backyard, and it just kind of, because we have a garden, we know we're starting to build a nice garden, and sometimes the little squirrels will come in and dig their nuts or just make a mess. And the cat just chews them out of our little garden for us. And then so I leave some water and some whatever for the cat out there, and it comes around, and then sometimes he I want to say it's a he, I don't know if it's, maybe it's a she.
Yeah.
He and I have a connection where we'll just be like staring at each other, just like kind of talking through our
Yeah.
minds, like, hey, it's okay, thank you, by the
Yeah.
way, and he's just
Yeah.
staring at me in the eye, and it's just so adorable. I just love the
It's
animals. They're so incredibly intelligent as far as they just have that, they just know, like when you something, they set up
yes.
your vibration.
Mm-hmm. I was talking to a friend the other day. Her mother recently died, and she said, I didn't cry, but when my dog died, I couldn't stop crying.
Mm.
And of course, and this person had a good relationship with her mother, but there's that unconditional love that we have with a pet, especially. And they just communicate with us, non-verbally, and just totally accept who we are. There's no judgment. There's just blissful love and joy. It's just a really beautiful thing when you have an animal. And we have a newly adopted feral cat, and where we live, it's like the hunting dream for a cat, because I do a really wild garden with bamboos. I
Oh,
create like a
wow.
little wild jungle here. And so this cat was around for quite like almost 6 months, and I was kept trying to say, "Come on, you could be friendly," but no, it was like totally not trusting me. And just like they say, first contact, with another species, it took just a tiny touch, I'm going to touch you, and then freaked out and run away. But now this cat loves us, and we love it.
Mm.
And it trusted us, because why do we get damaged and don't trust everybody? Because something happened in our life where our trust got tested, and we learned that we had to be careful. And
Mhm.
all children are taught, oh, don't go with strangers, especially in this day and age. But what does that teach us? It teaches us not to trust
Mm.
anybody.
Mhm.
So it's one of those double-edged swords.
Right.
We want to protect our children, but yet we want them to be loving and trusting of humanity, that humanity comes from a good place. So it's like this balance, everything is just,
Mm.
you want to do a little of this and a little of that. It's the middle way to do a happy life. You have to be cautious, but you
Mhm.
also have to get rid of any unnecessary fears.
Right. And you have a motto. It's a love is the weapon of mass illusion, right?
Illumination.
Illumination. Sorry.
Love is the weapon of
I
mass
thought it was
illumination.
illumination. And
I know.
yes, let's talk about that. So how has that played? How has that played in your sobriety journey?
Well, the more sober you are, the clearer you can get about what is love. Like for myself, I was a love junkie. One of my addictions was sex, relationships. Okay, I thought it was love, but when I got sober, I realized I was either going for a relationship because, oh, I thought the guy had a cool, apartment or a cool boat or a cool sense of adventure. Oh, he could teach me how to be an artist. Oh, he could teach me how to go diving. And it was always something, yes, that drew me to that person, but it wasn't true like reflection of seeing myself in that person. And I met my husband when I was 7 years, we got married when I was 7 years sober. And I knew the moment when I heard his voice, he like about a year and a half before we got married, he called me because a mutual friend said, "Oh, you should reach out to this woman." The moment I heard his voice, it like it set off a vibration
Mm.
inside my gut,
Mm.
and to me my gut is my my reasoning, my discernment, my choice meter, my gut. If my gut
Mhm.
feels that's today, after being sober for a while, but earlier in life, my gut was just a gut. And I would have a tummy ache maybe, but now my gut is like a psychic tool. So when my husband came into my life, I just immediately went to my journal and I said, I think I met my man. And and it was so bizarre how I recognized him, and I didn't know what he looked like. This was before the internet, and
Okay.
I had to tell him, send me a picture because I don't know what you look like, but I think I love you. And he thought I was nuts. But he's used to me now. I am a little nuts, but all artists have to be nuts. We have to be a little, to create new ideas and to get into that juicy place where you're just a conduit for creativity. You have to
Mm.
let yourself be a little nuts. It's fun to be a little nuts.
Yeah, that's a cute story. Yeah. And so were you satisfied with this picture? Like, oh yeah, he's a
Oh my God, he was such a hunk. I said, no wonder I'm in love. I mean, I couldn't believe how handsome he was. Plus, I had had a very clear psychic message when I got sober. I did
Mm.
one of those things where I don't know if you did this when you got sober, but you get really clear about what you want from the universe. And I wrote a list of this is what I want. I want a mate who's spiritual and sexy and smart. And oh, we'll have 2 kids. We'll probably adopt them because I've never had a pregnancy. And then other things on my list having to do with being my desire to communicate with the world. So along comes my husband, whose name is Carter, and he was a single parent of 2 kids. And I said, oh my God, you really have to be careful about what you ask the universe
Mm.
because you are going to get what you ask for. And so when he came in, I said, what? We don't have to adopt. You've already got 2 kids. And they desperately needed a stepmom because their bio mom was very messed up on drugs.
Mm.
And but it made me pause and think like, okay, this is what I asked for. Now I have to really realize like, is that what I really want? And that's what we all have to choose.
Yeah. Yeah, that reminds me of my story too. I remember when my youngest son's father, the 8-year-old, he and I had broken up. We were trying to make it work because I did get pregnant during my recovery. It wasn't really recovery because I relapsed again, but it didn't work. And I thought I wasn't going to have a relationship within like 10 years, in my head. And I remember always
Mm-hmm.
just thinking in my head, oh, I would do these like prayer request cards and put them in a box.
Yeah.
And it'd say for me to have a family unit one day, and this, but I was not ready. I didn't think I was ready anyway. I was sober at the time and I wasn't relapsing anymore. And then sure enough, so boom, this man falls. I meet this guy and he has a child like a year older than my youngest, and it just we fell in
Mm-hmm.
love, and I'm like, wait a minute, but I'm not ready, but I love him. I don't know what to do. But I just went with it because it
Yeah.
was a gift and it's what I've been asking for. But I was thinking in my head 10 years from now, but like the universe had other plans for me.
Right. Yeah. Right. We have to go with it. So getting back to that word love, I love the word love because it's a verb and it's a noun. And to me, it's the divine, it's the
Mhm.
sacred. And and so when I say that I'm a spirit activist, I could say that I'm a love activist and I spread love however I can. But a lot of people think, oh yeah, that sounds so corny. But the essence of love is the
Mhm.
mystery of the vibration that we only get when we're out of fear, because fear is on one side of the spectrum, love is on the other, and
Mhm.
you can't mix the two, really. I mean,
Mhm.
when you're experiencing love, you've decided, okay, I'm not going to give it fear any credit. But yet sometimes we forget and we go into fear, and that's when it's so impossible to think about like love. Like, how can I love the world because it's crazy and there's all this killing and all this blah blah blah.
Mhm.
Well, that's where it comes down to choosing. And so I'm the person who chooses to stay in that elevated state as much as I can, the state of love. And you can't get there until you've learned to love yourself. And as all addicts have to learn, that's why we're addicts or alcoholics, because we don't love ourselves.
Mhm.
And the very first lesson that we have to learn is to respect ourselves, to love ourselves. And what better way to prove it than to stop pouring toxic poison down your throat, to stop abusing ourselves. And
Mhm.
that's the first step about self-love, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Having that choice and saying no, not anymore. I have I should love myself enough to not use and put poison and toxic chemicals in our bodies.
Oh my God, yeah. It's like, who would do that? Who would pour down like, like antifreeze
Yeah,
down
exactly.
down somebody's throat, which is really when you see what alcohol does to even plants. I mean, if you spray alcohol on a plant, it
Yeah.
doesn't thrive. It's going to die.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's torture to the poor plants.
I
I was
know.
thinking about that. Like, no, poor plant. Oh, definitely
And
not.
and I have lost quite a few friends through um overdoses and whatnot. And
Oh.
even working as a sponsor, I have had a lot of death. And I don't work with people anymore because I can't take it anymore. Like, if somebody wants to kill themselves, God bless you, it's your choice. But this
Yeah.
this addiction thing is so strong that my work has to do with other things besides helping people with their addictions. So
Mhm.
there's people who devote themselves to that, and boy, they're amazing people. But I did that for a while, just free, working the way we do. And when you get sober, we want to help as many people as we can who are still suffering. But today I do prayer work when somebody is still suffering, whether it's with addiction or an actual disease like cancer or whatever. And I will just do a lot of heavy duty prayer work and, send my energy.
Mhm.
And then I fulfill my self love by fulfilling my destiny of being an artist and a writer and a spirit activist, because I do meditation videos and I do little talks I put up on my YouTube channel. And I feel that's my job. My job is to really turn people on to the beautiful magic of life through my books and my art.
Wow, that is beautiful. And thank you for doing that. We need more people like you and just to bring that love vibration into this world. We need that right now, especially during these times. So I appreciate you coming onto my podcast today. I know you mentioned a YouTube channel. Where can people find that or your books as well as like other
Yeah.
social media?
Well, the mothership, I call it, my website, TeZaLord.com, and it's TEZA. And whenever anybody calls me Tessa, I said, no, no, I'm not Tessa. I'm TeZa, because I gave that name to myself. That really is my spirit name.
Oh, nice.
And when I decided to rebirth myself from years of addiction, I gave myself that name. And so everything is there. My YouTube channel, of course, you just type in my name, and I use TeZa Lord everywhere, Instagram and X and Medium and Facebook and all that.
Wonderful. Was there any last thoughts or any other message you would like to share with the audience today?
Well, I just really like to encourage people to remember you have a choice, and that being in a state of fear is no fun. And just to try it, just to experiment, to be in the state of love. And you start that by loving yourself. So even if you go to the mirror, I do this a lot. I just look in my eyes and I just say, I love you. I love you. Because at one point I couldn't say that. I
Mhm.
couldn't. And that's the first step, to love yourself. And then everything in the world becomes a reflection of that self-respect, that self-love. And it's not a being an egomaniac. It's really the basis of being able to see God in everything, God in every speck of creation.
Absolutely. That was so beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Tessa.
You're
Many
welcome. Thank you so
blessings.
much too.
My pleasure.